The scorching Arizona sun beat down mercilessly on the red rock formations surrounding Sedona as 23-year-old Sophie Adams adjusted her worn leather backpack straps and checked her water supply one final time. It was March 15th, 2017, and she had driven 12 hours straight from her small apartment in Denver, Colorado, seeking solace in the desert's vast emptiness after losing her job at the local newspaper. Her plan was simple: spend a week hiking the lesser-known trails, clear her head, and figure out her next move in life. She had always been drawn to solitude, finding peace in nature's silence that the bustling city could never provide. Sophie's beaten-up Honda Civic sat parked at the trailhead of Devil's Bridge, one of Sedona's more remote hiking destinations. She had deliberately chosen this spot because it was less crowded than the popular tourist areas, offering her the isolation she craved. The trail stretched ahead of her, winding through towering red sandstone formations and sparse desert vegetation. Before we continue with Sophie's story, I'd love for you to subscribe to our channel if you haven't already, and please let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Your support means everything to us as we bring you these compelling stories. Sophie had been an experienced hiker since childhood, having grown up in Colorado's mountains with her father, a park ranger who had taught her everything about wilderness survival. Her hiking boots were well worn but reliable, and her backpack contained all the essentials: water purification tablets, first aid kit, energy bars, sleeping bag, and her most precious possession, a leather-bound journal where she documented her thoughts and experiences during solo trips. The journal had been a gift from her younger sister Emma on her 21st birthday, inscribed with the words, "For all your adventures, big and small." That morning she had called Emma in Denver, assuring her that she would check in every evening via text message. Emma, always the worrier of the two sisters, had expressed concern about Sophie hiking alone in unfamiliar territory, but Sophie had laughed it off with her characteristic confidence. "I've been doing this for years, Em. Besides, I need some time to think without distractions. The cell coverage is spotty, but I promise to text you every night before bed." Her voice carried the exhaustion that had plagued her for months, ever since the newspaper had laid off half their staff, including their most junior reporter. The first 2 days of her trip proceeded exactly as planned. Sophie hiked during the cooler morning hours, found shaded spots to rest during the intense midday heat, and set up camp in designated areas each evening. Her text messages to Emma were brief but reassuring. "Day 1 complete. Amazing sunset tonight. Love you." And day 2 was tough but beautiful. "The silence out here is exactly what I needed." Each message brought relief to Emma, who had been checking her phone obsessively since Sophie's departure, worried about her sister's state of mind following the devastating job loss. On the third day, March 17th, Sophie decided to venture off the marked trail to explore a narrow canyon she had spotted on her topographic map. The canyon wasn't part of any official hiking route, but Sophie's experience gave her confidence that she could navigate it safely. She left her main campsite early that morning, carrying only a day pack with water, snacks, and her journal. According to her final text message to Emma, sent at 7:43 a.m., she planned to return to her campsite by late afternoon. "Exploring something beautiful today, back by dinner. Miss you." Emma's phone remained silent that evening. No goodnight text arrived, and her calls went straight to voicemail. The automated message in Sophie's cheerful voice seemed to mock the growing dread in Emma's stomach. "Hi, you've reached Sophie. I'm probably out chasing a story or hiking somewhere with no signal. Leave a message and I'll get back to you as soon as I can." Initially, Emma attributed the silence to poor cell coverage, but as hours turned into a full day without contact, panic began to set in. She paced her apartment in Denver, calling Sophie's phone every 30 minutes and leaving increasingly frantic voicemails. Emma contacted the Coconino County Sheriff's Office on March 19th, reporting her sister as overdue from a hiking trip. The desk sergeant, Deputy Martinez, took down the information with practiced efficiency, explaining that missing hiker reports were unfortunately common in Arizona's vast wilderness areas. "We get about 2 or 3 of these calls every week, ma'am," Martinez explained in a tone that was meant to be reassuring, but only increased Emma's anxiety. "Most of the time, hikers just lose track of time or have equipment problems. We'll get some people out there to look for your sister right away." The search operation began immediately, with teams focusing on the last known location where Sophie had camped. Search and rescue volunteers, accompanied by trained dogs, combed through the Devil's Bridge area and surrounding canyons for any trace of the missing woman. The volunteers were a mix of professionals and locals who had volunteered their time countless times before. Retired teachers, construction workers, nurses, and shop owners who understood that in a place like Arizona, anyone could find themselves in need of rescue. They moved methodically through the terrain, calling Sophie's name and listening for any response that might echo off the canyon walls. Sophie's Honda Civic was found exactly where she had left it, with her car keys, wallet, and extra clothing still inside. The discovery provided searchers with a starting point, but also deepened the mystery. If Sophie had intended to leave the area, she would have needed her car keys. Inside the vehicle, investigators found Sophie's laptop, containing drafts of articles she had been working on freelance, and a folder full of rejection letters from newspapers across Colorado and neighboring states. The personal items painted a picture of someone struggling professionally, but still determined to pursue her passion for journalism. Sheriff Tom Bradley, a 30-year veteran of Arizona law enforcement, personally oversaw the search efforts. He had seen countless cases of missing hikers over the decades, and most ended in one of 3 ways. The person was found alive but injured. They were found deceased due to exposure or accident, or they were never found at all, becoming another statistic in the desert's long list of unsolved disappearances. Bradley hoped Sophie's case would fall into the first category, but as days passed without any trace, his optimism began to wane. He had developed an instinct over the years about which cases would end well, and something about this one felt different. The terrain where Sophie had disappeared was particularly challenging for search operations. The narrow canyon she had mentioned exploring was actually part of a complex network of slot canyons and rock formations that extended for miles in every direction. Flash flood channels carved by centuries of rare but violent desert storms had created a maze-like landscape where even experienced hikers could become disoriented. The red sandstone walls, beautiful from a distance, became potential death traps for anyone caught in the wrong place during a sudden weather event, or who made even a small navigational error. Emma arrived in Sedona 3 days after reporting her sister missing, driving the same route Sophie had taken from Denver. She had called in sick to her job at an accounting firm, telling her boss that she had a family emergency, but not providing details. The 12-hour drive gave her too much time to think about all the things that could have gone wrong, each mile marker seeming to mock her fears. She established herself at a local motel called the Desert Rose Inn, a modest establishment that catered to hikers and tourists on a budget, and spent her days hiking with search teams, calling out her sister's name until her voice became hoarse. At night, she would sit in the motel parking lot, staring at her phone and willing it to ring with news, any news, about Sophie's whereabouts. The waiting was agony, made worse by the well-meaning but ultimately hollow reassurances from friends and family back in Colorado. Her parents, divorced for over a decade, had temporarily put aside their differences to support Emma, but their constant phone calls asking for updates only added to her stress. "We should have never let her go alone," her mother kept saying, as if blame could somehow bring Sophie home. Local news stations picked up the story, broadcasting Sophie's photograph and last known location across Arizona and neighboring states. The missing woman was described as 5 feet 6 inches tall, with shoulder-length brown hair and green eyes, last seen wearing hiking boots, khaki pants, and a blue long-sleeved shirt. The media attention brought dozens of tips from people claiming to have seen someone matching Sophie's description, but each lead turned into another dead end for investigators. Gas station attendants, restaurant workers and fellow hikers all called in with sightings, but none could be verified or led to any concrete evidence. As the search entered its second week, the scope of operations began to contract. The initial enthusiasm of volunteers gave way to the harsh reality that one person in thousands of square miles of desert wilderness was like finding a needle in a haystack. Professional search teams continued their systematic grid searches, but the window for finding Sophie alive was closing rapidly. Desert survival experts explained to Emma that even experienced hikers rarely survived more than a week without water in Arizona's harsh climate, and temperatures during Sophie's disappearance had reached over 90 degrees during the day while dropping to near freezing at night. The case took an unexpected turn when searchers discovered footprints in a dried creek bed approximately 2 miles from Sophie's last known campsite. The boot prints appeared to match the tread pattern of the hiking boots Sophie had been wearing, and they led deeper into the canyon system toward an area that had not yet been thoroughly searched. This discovery reinvigorated the search efforts and brought new hope to Emma, who had begun to fear the worst after 2 weeks of negative results. She studied photographs of the footprints obsessively, convincing herself that she could recognize her sister's distinctive gait in the impression left in the dried mud. Following the footprint trail, search teams descended into a particularly narrow section of canyon where the walls rose nearly 100 feet on either side, and the floor was barely wide enough for 2 people to walk side by side. The geological formations in this area were stunning but treacherous, with loose rocks and sudden drop-offs hidden behind seemingly stable terrain. It was exactly the type of environment where an experienced hiker might venture for the solitude and natural beauty, but where a single misstep could prove fatal. The search dogs seemed agitated in this area, whining and pulling at their leashes, as if they had detected something their handlers couldn't perceive. The footprints continued for several hundred yards before disappearing on a section of solid rock, where tracking became impossible. Searchers spent days examining every crack, crevice, and possible hiding spot in the immediate area, but found no additional signs of Sophie's passage. The trail had gone cold in the most literal sense, leaving investigators with more questions than answers about what had happened to the missing woman. Emma joined the searchers in this area, crawling on her hands and knees to peer into every shadow and alcove, desperate to find some sign that Sophie had been there. During this intensive phase of the search, Emma made a discovery that would haunt her for years to come. While exploring a side canyon with one of the volunteer search teams, she found Sophie's water bottle wedged between 2 boulders near what appeared to be a natural resting spot. The bottle was nearly empty and showed signs of having been there for several days, giving credence to the theory that Sophie had made it at least this far into the canyon system. However, the location was more than 3 miles from where the footprints had been found, suggesting either that Sophie had traveled much farther than initially believed, or that the water bottle had been moved by natural forces like flash flooding. The discovery of the water bottle prompted an expansion of the search area, with teams now focusing on an even more remote section of canyon country. This terrain was so rugged and isolated that it was rarely visited even by experienced desert explorers. The rock formations created natural shelters and hidden alcoves where someone could potentially survive for extended periods if they had adequate supplies and knowledge of desert survival techniques. Sheriff Bradley authorized the use of helicopter overflights to survey areas that were too dangerous or time-consuming for ground teams to access. The aircraft's rotors echoing off canyon walls as they searched for any sign of movement or unusual coloration that might indicate human presence. From the air, the true scope of the search area became apparent. The canyon system stretched for dozens of miles, branching and intersecting in patterns that defied easy navigation. Thermal imaging equipment detected several heat signatures that initially raised hopes, but each turned out to be desert wildlife or natural rock formations that retained heat from the sun. The helicopter searches continued for another week, covering hundreds of square miles of some of Arizona's most remote and beautiful landscape, but yielded no trace of Sophie Adams. The pilots reported that the terrain below looked like the surface of an alien planet, with colors and formations that seemed impossible to exist on Earth. As March gave way to April, the organized search efforts were officially suspended. Sheriff Bradley made the difficult decision after consulting with search and rescue experts who explained that the chances of survival after 3 weeks in the desert were essentially zero. The case remained open and active, but resources needed to be allocated to other emergencies and missing person cases. Emma was devastated by the decision, but understood the practical limitations facing law enforcement in such a vast and challenging environment. The meeting where Bradley delivered this news took place in his office, with Emma clutching Sophie's water bottle and fighting back tears as she listened to statistics about survival rates and resource allocation. The suspension of official search efforts did not mean the end of looking for Sophie. Emma remained in Sedona for another month, hiking different sections of the canyon system every day, armed with topographical maps and a GPS device. She retraced every trail where searchers had found potential evidence, looking for anything that might have been missed during the organized efforts. Local hiking clubs and desert enthusiasts volunteered their time to accompany Emma on these searches, touched by her determination and unwillingness to give up hope. These volunteers included retirees who had moved to Sedona for the climate, young outdoor enthusiasts drawn by the area's reputation for adventure, and local business owners who understood the importance of community support during tragedies. During these independent search efforts, Emma began to piece together a more complete picture of her sister's final days. She interviewed other hikers who had been in the area during mid-March, learning that there had been an unusual weather pattern that week. While no significant precipitation had fallen, there had been several dust storms that reduced visibility and could have disoriented even experienced hikers. One elderly couple from Minnesota recalled seeing a young woman matching Sophie's description on March 16th, the day before she disappeared. But they had been too far away to make contact or note which direction she was heading. They remembered her because she had been alone and seemed to be moving with purpose toward a less traveled section of the trail system. The mystery deepened when Emma discovered that Sophie had been more troubled than she had let on during their final phone conversation. Speaking with Sophie's former colleagues at the Denver Post, Emma learned that her sister's job loss had been particularly devastating because it represented the failure of a lifelong dream to become an investigative journalist. Sophie had apparently been struggling with depression and had been considering whether to continue pursuing journalism or change careers entirely. Her former editor, a gruff but kind man named Robert Chen, revealed that Sophie had been working on a story about corruption in local government when the layoffs occurred, and she had been devastated to leave the investigation unfinished. This information cast her solo desert trip in a different light. Rather than a simple hiking adventure, it may have been a period of deep soul-searching about her future direction in life. Emma remembered conversations with Sophie over the past year where her sister had expressed frustration with the changing media landscape and the difficulty of making a living as a journalist. "Maybe I'm just fooling myself," Sophie had said during one late-night phone call. "Maybe I should have studied something practical like you did." Emma had tried to encourage her sister to persist, but now she wondered if she should have been more supportive of Sophie's doubts and uncertainties. Sheriff Bradley met with Emma several times during this period, sharing what little information the investigation had uncovered while being careful not to give false hope. He explained that the Coconino County Sheriff's Office received dozens of missing person reports each year and that many cases went unsolved despite extensive search efforts. The desert was unforgiving, and even small mistakes in navigation or preparation could have fatal consequences. However, he also acknowledged that Sophie's experience level and apparent preparation made her disappearance particularly puzzling. In his 30 years of law enforcement, he had developed a sense for cases that would likely be solved, and Sophie's case felt different from the typical missing hiker scenario. As summer approached and temperatures began to soar above 100 degrees daily, Emma finally made the heartbreaking decision to return to Colorado. She had exhausted her savings, used up all her vacation time from work, and was physically and emotionally drained from months of searching. Before leaving Sedona, she established a small memorial at the trailhead where Sophie had begun her final hike, consisting of a simple wooden cross with her sister's name and dates, along with a waterproof container holding photos and letters from family and friends. The memorial was modest but meaningful, placed near a large boulder where it would be visible to other hikers while remaining respectful of the natural environment. The drive back to Denver was one of the most difficult experiences of Emma's life. She had come to Arizona with hope and determination, convinced that she would find her sister and bring her home. Now she was returning with nothing but unanswered questions and a grief so profound that it seemed to change the very landscape around her. The mountains of Colorado, once a source of comfort and beauty, now reminded her only of Sophie's absence and the adventures they would never share together. She found herself stopping at gas stations and rest areas, unable to continue driving as waves of sorrow washed over her. The case of Sophie Adams joined the long list of unsolved disappearances in Arizona's wilderness areas. Her story was featured periodically in true crime podcasts and missing person websites, keeping her name and photograph in public awareness. Emma maintained a Facebook page dedicated to finding Sophie, sharing updates from occasional searches by volunteers and posting memories of her sister's life and personality. The page attracted thousands of followers who were touched by Sophie's story and Emma's unwavering dedication to finding answers. Comments came from around the world, with people sharing their own stories of loss and offering words of support and encouragement. Years passed with no new developments in the case. Emma gradually learned to live with the uncertainty, though she never stopped hoping for resolution. She returned to Sedona each year on the anniversary of Sophie's disappearance, hiking the same trails and maintaining the small memorial at the trailhead. These annual pilgrimages became a way of honoring her sister's memory while also keeping the case alive in the minds of local law enforcement and the hiking community. Emma would spend a week in Sedona each March, staying at the same motel and walking the same trails, hoping that somehow the desert would finally reveal its secrets. During one of these anniversary trips, Emma met other families who had lost loved ones in Arizona's wilderness areas. She discovered an informal network of people united by similar tragedies, all searching for closure and answers that might never come. These meetings were both heartbreaking and oddly comforting, providing Emma with a sense of community among people who understood her pain in ways that even close friends could not. They shared strategies for coping with ambiguous loss, recommended resources for families of missing persons, and offered practical advice about maintaining hope while accepting uncertainty. The breakthrough came in an entirely unexpected way, 8 years after Sophie's disappearance. In March 2025, a group of archaeology students from Northern Arizona University were conducting a survey of Native American rock art sites in a remote section of canyon country when they made a discovery that would finally provide answers to the mystery that had haunted Emma and law enforcement for nearly a decade. The students were part of a graduate program studying prehistoric cultures of the American Southwest, and their work required them to access extremely remote areas that were rarely visited by modern hikers or tourists. The team was led by Dr. Patricia Williams, a professor of archaeology who had been studying the region's ancient cultures for over 20 years. The specific site they were investigating had been identified through satellite imagery as potentially containing undocumented petroglyphs, but it required technical climbing skills to access safely. The location was so remote and difficult to reach that it had never been included in the search efforts for Sophie, despite being within the general area where she had disappeared. The students were rappelling into a narrow slot canyon that twisted and turned for nearly half a mile, before opening into a small amphitheater surrounded by towering sandstone walls. As they descended the canyon walls, one of the students, a graduate student named Jake Thompson, noticed something unusual lodged in a crevice about 30 feet above the canyon floor, something that clearly didn't belong in the natural environment. At first glance, it appeared to be a piece of leather or fabric, darkened by years of exposure to the elements, but somehow protected from complete deterioration by its position in the narrow crevice. Jake called out to his fellow students and Dr. Williams, and they decided to investigate further, despite the fact that it would require additional time and equipment to reach the object safely. Using climbing gear to investigate further, the students discovered a leather-bound journal wedged securely between two rock faces. The journal was weathered but intact, protected from the elements by its position in the narrow crevice. The leather cover had darkened to a deep brown color, and some of the metal fittings showed signs of corrosion, but the binding remained solid and the pages inside appeared to be largely undamaged. When they carefully extracted it and opened the cover, they found Sophie Adams's name written in familiar handwriting on the inside front cover, along with the inscription Emma had written 8 years earlier, "For all your adventures, big and small." Dr. Williams immediately recognized the significance of their discovery. She had been living in Sedona during Sophie's disappearance and remembered the extensive search efforts and media coverage. The students contacted the Coconino County Sheriff's Office using their satellite communication device, and within hours, Sheriff Bradley was examining the most significant piece of evidence to emerge from the case in 8 years. The sheriff had thought about Sophie's case many times over the intervening years, and the discovery of her journal brought back all the frustration and sadness he had felt when the original search was suspended. Sheriff Bradley immediately contacted Emma in Colorado, making a phone call that would change her life forever. "Emma, this is Sheriff Bradley in Coconino County. I have some news about your sister's case." The words hit Emma like a physical blow, and she had to sit down as Bradley explained about the discovery of Sophie's journal. After 8 years of silence, the desert had finally yielded up one of its secrets. Emma made arrangements to fly to Arizona immediately, her mind racing with questions about what the journal might contain and what it would tell her about Sophie's final days. Sophie's journal contained entries spanning her entire Arizona trip, providing investigators and Emma with a detailed account of her final days. The entries revealed that Sophie had indeed been struggling with depression and uncertainty about her future, but they also showed her gradually finding peace and clarity through her solitude in the desert. Her writing was thoughtful and introspective, describing the beauty of the landscape and her growing sense that the trip was helping her process the disappointments and setbacks she had experienced in Denver. The early entries were filled with anger and frustration about losing her job, but as the days progressed, her tone became more reflective and ultimately more hopeful. In one particularly poignant entry dated March 16th, Sophie wrote, "I woke up this morning and watched the sunrise paint the canyon walls in shades of gold and red that no photograph could ever capture. For the first time in months, I felt something other than despair. Maybe losing that job wasn't the end of my dreams. Maybe it was just a detour. There's something about this place that strips away all the noise and confusion and lets you see what really matters." The entry continued with detailed observations about the wildlife she had observed and the profound silence that enveloped the desert during the early morning hours. The final entries in the journal told a story that was both tragic and unexpectedly uplifting. On March 17th, Sophie had ventured into the Slot Canyon, where the journal was eventually found, drawn by her curiosity about the geological formations and the promise of complete solitude. She had been carefully navigating the narrow passages when a section of loose rock gave way beneath her feet, causing her to fall approximately 15 feet onto a rocky ledge. The journal entry describing the accident was written in a shaky hand, but Sophie's words remained clear and coherent as she assessed her situation and the likelihood of rescue. Sophie's entry about the fall was clinical and detailed, drawing on her journalistic training to document what had happened. "I should have tested that rock before putting my full weight on it. Dad always said to check every handhold and foothold twice, but I was distracted by the beautiful light filtering down through the canyon. The fall knocked the wind out of me, and I think I may have broken my left leg. There's definitely something wrong with my ribs on the right side. I'm trapped on a ledge, about 15 feet down from where I fell, with steep rock walls on all sides. My day pack is still with me, so I have some water and energy bars, but no one knows exactly where I am." Boo! What was most remarkable about Sophie's final entries was the absence of panic or despair. Instead of focusing on her dire circumstances, she wrote extensively about the extraordinary beauty of her surroundings and the strange sense of peace that settled over her as she accepted her situation. "I've spent so much time lately worrying about what I was going to do with my life, but sitting here watching the light change on these ancient walls, I realize that maybe the question isn't what I'm going to do, but who I'm going to be." The desert has a way of putting things in perspective. In her entry dated March 18th, Sophie described her first full day trapped on the ledge. She had rationed her water carefully and used techniques her father had taught her to stay warm during the cold desert night. But more than survival strategies, the entry focused on her reflections about life, family, and the unexpected gifts that could come from even the most difficult circumstances. "I've never experienced silence like this before. In the city, there's always some background noise, traffic, air conditioning, people talking. But here, the quiet is so complete that I can hear my own heartbeat. It's terrifying and beautiful at the same time." Sophie's final journal entry, written in a shaky hand that betrayed her pain and weakness, was dated March 19th. By this time, she understood that her chances of rescue were minimal, but her words showed remarkable acceptance and grace in the face of death. She wrote about spending her last hours watching the play of sunlight on the canyon walls and listening to the profound silence of the desert. She described seeing a family of desert foxes in the early morning, their russet fur brilliant against the red rock, and feeling grateful to witness such a moment of wild beauty in her final days. Most remarkably, the final entry expressed no regret about her decision to take the solo trip and no anger about her circumstances. Instead, Sophie wrote extensively about her love for Emma and their parents, asking forgiveness for any worry and pain her disappearance would cause. "I know Emma will blame herself for not stopping me from coming here alone, but I need her to know that this trip gave me something I desperately needed. I found peace here and clarity about what matters most. I hope she can find some comfort in knowing that I wasn't afraid at the end. The desert held me gently." The journal's discovery allowed investigators to focus their search efforts on the specific canyon where it had been found. The archaeology students provided detailed GPS coordinates and descriptions of the route they had taken to reach the site, information that enabled search and rescue teams to plan a technical recovery operation. Within days, Sheriff Bradley had assembled a team of expert climbers and rope rescue specialists to access the narrow slot canyon and search for Sophie's remains in the area described in her journal entries. The recovery operation was challenging and dangerous, requiring the same level of technical climbing skills that the archaeology students had used. The slot canyon was even more narrow and treacherous than the journal had indicated, with several sections where the walls closed to within a few feet of each other, and the floor dropped away into unseen depths. The rescue team had to use sophisticated rigging systems and specialized equipment to safely navigate the terrain while searching every ledge and alcove for any sign of Sophie's presence. On the third day of the recovery operation, the team located Sophie's remains on a ledge deep within the slot canyon, exactly where her journal entries had indicated she had fallen. She had apparently died peacefully, probably from dehydration and exposure, while maintaining her dignity and finding solace in the natural beauty surrounding her final resting place. Her body was positioned in such a way that suggested she had been looking up at the narrow strip of sky visible between the canyon walls when she died, and her day pack was arranged neatly beside her as if she had been organizing her belongings. Emma was finally able to bring her sister home to Colorado for burial, ending 8 years of uncertainty and anguish. The funeral service was held at a small church in Denver, where both sisters had been baptized as children, and was attended by hundreds of people whose lives had been touched by Sophie's story. The mourners included many of the volunteers who had participated in the original search efforts, fellow journalists who had followed Sophie's case over the years, and complete strangers who had been moved by her story and Emma's dedication to finding answers. Sheriff Bradley delivered a eulogy that honored both Sophie's adventurous spirit and Emma's unwavering dedication to finding the truth. He spoke about the lessons that law enforcement could learn from cases like Sophie's, and the importance of never giving up hope, even when circumstances seemed hopeless. The sheriff had attended many funerals over his career, but Sophie's service was particularly moving, because it represented not just an ending, but a kind of resolution that brought peace to a family that had lived with uncertainty for 8 long years. The case of Sophie Adams became a powerful reminder of both the beauty and danger inherent in America's wilderness areas, while also serving as a testament to the unbreakable bonds between family members and the human capacity for hope in the face of uncertainty. Emma established a foundation in Sophie's name to support search and rescue operations in Arizona, ensuring that her sister's legacy would continue to help other families facing similar tragedies. The Sophie Adams Foundation provided funding for equipment, training, and technology that could help locate missing persons more effectively in challenging terrain. Sophie's journal was eventually returned to Emma, who treasured it as the final gift from a sister she had never stopped believing she would find. The weathered leather pages contained not just the story of Sophie's final days, but a profound meditation on life, death, and the healing power of nature that continues to inspire all those who hear her remarkable story. Emma had excerpts from the journal published in a small book, with proceeds going to search and rescue organizations, ensuring that Sophie's words and wisdom would reach people facing their own moments of doubt and despair. The discovery of the journal also provided closure for the many volunteers and law enforcement officers who had participated in the original search efforts. For 8 years, they had wondered if they had missed something, if there had been a clue they should have followed more carefully. Learning that Sophie had fallen into such an inaccessible location helped them understand that no amount of searching could have found her without the kind of technical equipment and expertise that wasn't available during the original operation. Sheriff Bradley noted that the case had changed protocols for wilderness searches, leading to better cooperation between law enforcement and technical rescue specialists. In the years that followed, Sophie's story became a case study in wilderness safety programs and search and rescue training courses. Her journal entries provided valuable insights into the psychology of survival situations and the importance of mental preparation for outdoor adventures. The detailed account of her accident and her response to being trapped also helped inform safety recommendations for solo hikers, particularly in challenging terrain like Arizona's slot canyon systems, where traditional search methods might prove inadequate. Emma continued to return to Sedona each year, but her visits took on a different character after Sophie's remains were found. Instead of searching desperately for clues, she now came to honor her sister's memory and to find her own peace in the landscape that had meant so much to Sophie. She often hiked with other families who were dealing with similar losses, sharing what she had learned about hope, persistence, and the strange ways that healing could emerge from even the most devastating circumstances. The desert that had taken her sister had also, in its own mysterious way, given her back the closure she had needed to move forward with her life.